Hello and thank you for watching. I am Arl Adamson, part of Team T3ch out of Boise, Idaho, and today I'm bringing to you a very underused archetype in this current meta that might have some applications. This video will have slightly better sound quality as I am using a Apple headphone microphone this time. Still playing with the lighting and the overall settings. We hope to get these videos in higher quality as we keep going. So let me start by saying this is the longer of the two videos. There's a short version of this that simply covers the cards, some brief decisions I made in the deck construction. You're welcome to find that in the link below. This video's purpose is to really dive deep into some of the situations that first off, made me build this deck, second off, what decisions went into making the deck, and more importantly, what I learned playing the deck. This deck did go undefeated at Friday night, which was ironic because I am not an aggro player by any means. My team was playing all the Sphinx's Revelations, so I was not able to play control or combo, which is generally my second pick, as I usually would, and I wanted to allow them to explore their ideas, so I decided to toss something just real quick together, an archetype that I'm fairly familiar with, but haven't necessarily spent a whole lot of time playing. Just have helped a lot of people in constructing it and used to play it briefly when it first came out. And that archetype is werewolves. This is a reckless Waif, which ironically actually has a bit of a place in the current meta. I've been seeing it a lot in sideboards, especially when I was playing 5-color control. It would get sided in against me because I just don't have a turn 1 play. So they'll bring in the Reckless Waif as an easy turn 2, 3 extra damage. It actually gets kind of gross when they, if they're playing Blitz, they go turn 1 Waif, turn 2 Burning Tree, Lightning Mauler, swing 7. It's about as good as a champion in that case, champion of the Parish to be precise. So Reckless Waif was a bit of an easy pick for me. So of course running a full play set of those. Now this was actually a bit of where the inspiration to build werewolves came from. The Reckless Waifs being played against me in my 5-color control, as well as seeing it played against Danny and a few other members of the team just as a sideboard tech, brought it kind of to the forefront of my mind. The recent success of Naya Blitz also helped kind of bring that to my mind, running cards such as Avabruck that, if unanswered, can single-handedly end the game, but more importantly serve as the otherwise missing anthem. We no longer have Honor the Peer, we have Avabruck. And dropping him as an anthem is oftentimes more important than dropping him as the werewolf that he is. So those two were easy picks to incorporate into a fast aggro deck, something to throw together as an alternative to the control that I would usually play. But I decided to take it one step further and really go with this werewolf tribal thing, because the strengths of werewolves are that they are bigger than everything else, just about everything else in the meta. Aside from Reanimator, werewolves tend to be bigger than most of the meta. They can combat even bulky creatures such as Luxodon Smiter. They will chomp up Restoration Angels and Centaur Healers all day long, and all the dorks and enemy Blitz that's running around just don't measure up to the size of a werewolf and the abilities that werewolves have with them. And fortunately, in a Shockland heavy format, we don't have to worry about whether they're flipping or not, because people have to either take damage, which is basically a free attack for me, or skip a turn, which is basically an extra free attack for me. So it's really a lose-lose situation for my opponent 9 times out of 10, especially game 1 when they don't necessarily know what they're up against and certainly aren't prepared with the necessary spot removal that they would need to combat. So one of the all-stars for werewolves as I started to put this together is definitely Kieran Outlaw. First off, being a 2/2 first strike, 3 mana is a little bit expensive, but still 2/2 first strike's good. It combats 99% of the creatures that you see that early in the game. But more importantly, when it flips over, you've got your 3/3 double strike that makes all your werewolves have to be blocked by 2 creatures. Basically, it is a Pyre Heart with other effects added on top of it. Current Outlaw is great for closing matches, and even better for just stalling until you get that position where you can close the match. Speaking of closing matches, a automatic in is Instigator Game. I came down to 2. Originally I had 3 in the deck, and then last minute decision. By the way, this entire deck was built 10 minutes before FNM, but I had been thinking about it for the entire day at work before that. Instigator Game is great for closing matches and definitely destroys Jund. Found that out at FNM. That simple +1 and then flipping over and +3, it's just too much damage for most decks to deal with. Jund and Junk both have a lot of trouble dealing with something like that. Now, werewolves have definitely been a common pick for more casual players who are trying to get in competitive meta because it is fairly cheap archetype to build. The lands aren't too expensive. You don't even need the lands in a lot of cases, depending on how many dorks you run. If you run dorks, things like Scorn Villager. But one of the cards that everybody seems to have mixed feelings about when building this deck is whether to include the best werewolf of them all. Now, there's no contest whether this is the best werewolf of them all. The Huntmaster of the Fells is just absolutely amazing. He's viable in many formats, amazingly costed creature. You put 4 power on board and 2 life for 4 mana, and then has a chance of flipping over and winning games on a fairly quick clock, actually. I knew that I needed the top end because most of my dudes are small, and if I'm not getting the flip, this is the only kind of recovery that I really have access to. So I decided to definitely go with Huntmaster over Immerwolf, which tends to be the alternate choice, because I'm less concerned with them transforming and more concerned with how much damage potential I actually have. And Huntmaster definitely adds a lot more damage potential. Now I only incorporated 2 Full Moon's Rise. The +1/+0 trample was actually very relevant. It turns a turn 2 flipped Reckless Waif into 4 easy damage with a regeneration shield at all times, which is pretty fun. Much more comfortable situation to drop things like Mare or Current Outlaw into. And I didn't want to see very many of them at a time, but it definitely seemed like a good 2 of. Now, an automatic must for werewolf decks is undoubtedly Moonmist. Running a full playset of those. The combat trick is amazing. Unfortunately, Huntmaster of the Fells is a played card, so you can't always get the best results out of Moonmist, but most matches, especially in my meta, I don't have to worry about Huntmaster because even enemy werewolf decks won't tend to run Huntmaster, and honestly, Huntmaster is the only wolf that I'm truly concerned about because they're going to try to block favorably for themselves in the mirror match, which I didn't get a chance to play, but at least know the mirror match fairly well. They're going to try to block in a favorable way for themselves, which means generally not losing too many creatures, and a surprise Moonmist will generally add enough damage to just close the game. And preventing the damage is often relevant. Now, that was all easy. That was the easy part of building a werewolf deck, but I knew that simple werewolves was not going to be able to compete with the tier 1 decks. I knew that Junk Reanimator would walk all over it. Jund would probably walk all over it, and they get to if they hit turn 2 Farseek and then hit a Thragtusk or drop a Liliana in the middle to make you sack a dude, there's just there's no real recovery. You just lose to that. So I decided to approach it from a slightly different angle, which this will hint to. This is a full playset of the FNM promo Avacyn's Pilgrim, if you haven't seen the artwork before. The Pilgrim makes for very, very interesting drops, quickly getting in some other dudes also allows me to run a lower land count and more dudes. Gives Mare another target, almost serves a similar task as in Blitz, just to help you get more dudes into play. Then, to actually run some white creatures, I run 2 Champion of Parish, considering all werewolves are humans when they first enter. He got big a couple of times, a couple of one-land hands that just involved a champion and multiple mares of Avabruck. At one point I played all 4 mares after dropping a champion, which was fairly gross. One of the reasons I actually kind of dislike the human archetype, because it can do that, but sometimes you play what you gotta play. Then this is one of the better options that I had in white. This would be Frontline Medic. Sack it to stop their bonfire, stop their magma quake, which surprisingly actually almost won a game against me. And most importantly, stop the Sphinx's revelation that would get them the answers they need, as well as out of range of my kill. So Frontline Medic's abilities, definitely very good. Did not get a whole lot of play out of his indestructibility, but the ability to sack him to counter an X spell is definitely very viable, especially in my meta. I'm not sure if that's the case for all of you. Now, this was kind of a rocky decision for me. This would be 2 Mentor the Meek. The one thing I felt the entire deck was missing was some sort of card draw, some sort of way to refuel. Once I got all my dudes into play, that was it. If that didn't go, that didn't go. I was just done for. So I felt Mentor was a great way to make use of late game, well, mid to late game, my late game, which is like turn 6. Great way to make use of the later Reckless Waif and Avacyn's Pilgrim Champion, and those cards that you really want to see early on. This actually gives them purpose in the later game. I didn't want to go over 2 just because he doesn't have a whole lot of purpose beyond that, but he is human, he does have synergy, and drawing those cards is actually relevant and did help me get back into the game on a couple of matches. Now, the real reason, this was the true deciding factor of why I decided to run white. I knew I had access to white via Avacyn's Pilgrim, and I knew that would be an easy way to keep the mana base consistent, as well as lower the amount of land needed so that I wouldn't get flooded, which is often a problem for werewolves. But the only thing that made me decide to go headstrong into the Naya color werewolves, Boros Charm. Wrath kills werewolves, plain and simple. So does Abrupt Decay. Boros Charm is the perfect answer for both of those, as well as giving the option of Double Strike, which is ridiculous when you've got a flipped werewolf, and it just creates amazing damage potential, especially if you drop an Anthem via Mare or something else. And the 4 damage to the face was probably my most common game 1 kill, because werewolves are so good about getting that damage in that I can hit somebody down to 3 or sometimes even exactly 4, and they don't have a whole lot of wiggle room around that. Right when they're about to establish, I've got that 4 extra damage that I can deal in, and it really gives me a comfortable ability to tap everything out, go headstrong into an attack, get in the damage, let them do what they're going to do when they're running relatively low on options, go to my untap, Boros Charm to the face, good game. It was a very, very good card. In fact, I had one of the more experienced players at the end of the night tell me, don't tell the werewolf kid, there was a kid that genuinely plays werewolves at our shop, don't tell him that Boros Charm needs to be in his deck, because that card single-handedly won the Junk matchup, which I thought would have been a bit of a harder matchup. He did get fairly mana screwed game 2, but still that Boros Charm was just too rough to handle. So let's go ahead and go to the mana base. There are 22 lands, I believe, starting with 4 Cavern of Souls. It's a pretty easy decision considering I only run 9 non-creature spells, and everything is all the same creature type. And the one of the creatures in there actually helps produce the relevant colors for the non-creature spells. 4 Stomping Ground. These are the old art. For some reason I have one signed. Same one I used for the Pet Control. Now here's the only slow land. Again, those are lands of Corset and Innistrad. We call them slow lands because they always come into play tapped on turn 1. Rootbound Crag. Now because red and green are definitely the most prevalent colors, that's why that's the slow land I decided to run. Then we've got a full set of Sacred Foundry. As you can tell, I took a lot of damage from shocks throughout the course of the evening. Next we have Temple Garden. Then a single forest to help me drop my Avacyn's Pilgrim. And a single Kessig Wolf Run, which was only relevant once. I pumped it up for a surprise 1 extra damage, which happened to put him within range of a Warstrom. So that is the main deck, 22 lands, fairly generic werewolf build, but using, let's see, 10 of the slots to splash that kind of Naya idea to it. Now, I knew werewolves would not be viable in certain matchups. There's some matchups where they're just going to be able to get the Wrath, you're not going to be able to deal damage fast enough, they're going to have the spot removal, the control, you're not going to get through, and I knew this. So I had to figure out a way to combat those things. One of the first things I knew I had to combat was Reanimator, because if they drop an early Reanimator target, I lose, plain and simple. Honestly doesn't matter too much which target it is. It can be as small as a Centaur healer with a Restoration Angel, they slow me down too much. So I knew Rest in Peace would be needed. This also helps against some of the controls, at least I don't have to worry about snapped back abrupt decays or searing spears or any of that silliness that they might thought scour off of themselves. So didn't want to run more than 2 sideboard just because it can kind of clutter up the deck. I also knew that Boros Charm would be relevant in some of those matchups where I'm expecting that Wrath or might need that more direct damage to close the gap. To help buy me some time, of course, 2 Thalia. It's almost an automatic must in any white tribal deck there is, because Thalia helps you really get your creatures down, protected, and buy you that 1 extra turn you need. This really messed up some Supreme Verdicts, stopped some Dreadbores, it really made Planeswalkers not drop when they were supposed to. It's an extremely helpful card. I kept it as 2 because I never wanted to see more than 1 at a time. It can be very detrimental. And the first strike is wonderful on Thalia, especially in this format. But Thalia is part of a bigger picture. I knew that I needed to get in before the Wrath, or ensure that I could survive the Wrath. And Boros Charm was kind of a risky attempt to survive the Wrath, so I decided to actually sideboard into 2 Thalia, as I mentioned, the last 2 Champion of the Parish to complete the playset, 4 Burning Tree Emissary. Might be able to see where I'm going with this. So before Burning Tree Emissary, and if you can guess the last 4 cards before I get to them, 4 Lightning Mauler. That's right, I sideboarded completely into Naya Blitz. Majority of my night was spent taking my sideboard, picking up the entire thing, shuffling it into my deck, staring at my opponent for a sec, making them feel uncomfortable, looking at my deck, and pulling out 15 cards. Depending on the matchup, the usual sideboard would bring in 2 Thalia, 2 Champion, 4 Burning Tree, 4 Lightning Mauler. So that brings me to a grand total of 4 Lightning, 4 Burning, 4 Champion, 2 Thalia, which is basically adding in the 4 Mare of Avabruck, the shell for Naya Blitz. A very powerful deck right now. Loses to certain things, mainly the mid-range that werewolves are really good against. I was thinking about that there. But to take out, usually I would take out both Full Moon's Rise and all 4 Moon Mists. The werewolf specific cards just aren't going to be relevant when I'm playing Blitz. They're also going to be way too slow. I need to be playing creatures. The frontline medics and the mentor of the Meeks were often in jeopardy to be taken out because they weren't relevant in certain matchups. Instigator Gang came out quite often. Huntmaster came out a couple times. I ended up throughout the night learning that I wanted to keep him in, at least as a 3 of, just as kind of a get back into the game, because I really don't have any other source of life gain, and if I do fall behind, Huntmaster is the best way I've found to come back. Current Outlaw came out, I believe, once, but I found that I was starting to like it a little bit more, at least as a 2 or 3 of. So sideboarding took some playing around. It really took studying my opponent's deck in the early game. I would specifically slow roll just enough to understand what my opponent was playing so I knew what the proper sideboard was. That 4th Burrow Charm almost always came in with the rest of the Blitz shell and really took me to straight up Blitz. So my opponent would sideboard in whatever, generally Wrath, Terminus, Supreme Verdict, Bonfire, whatever they were bringing in, and it just wasn't relevant because I was blitzing them far too fast, and now they're cluttered up with all this Wrath spell, sometimes that they wouldn't be able to cast because I have Thalia on board. So, and I would also sideboard out a single land, which was either Kessig or the Forest. Usually the Kessig came out just because I'm not going to have enough mana to do it. So this sideboard tech is really what won me the night. I played against, it was 5 rounds, went completely undefeated. I did lose 2 games. One game I lost to a odd deck. It was turn 1 Stromkirk Noble, so I was thinking I had a good aggro matchup here because nobody's going to out aggro werewolves. I'm just going to be bigger than them. So I just started to play everything out. And then he started dropping kill spell, kill spell, kill spell, kill spell, and it became like some sort of weird black-red control with a lot of spot removal, so I wasn't sure what to think of that. But game 2 I definitely knew what I needed to do, got in there. And then the other game I lost was, I was not expecting sideboard Gloom Surgeon in a junk deck. It looked a lot like Junk Reanimator, turned out to be a junk, what I call a junk utility. Basically cheap cost creatures that, or cheap cost cards that do a lot. Vampire Nighthawk, Liliana of the Veil, Deathrite Shaman. Basically I'm going to play cheap things that win games. And he brought in Gloom Surgeon, and I just totally wasn't prepared for it. I had gone completely blitz because I wanted to get in before the big stuff came down. And game 2 I realized it wasn't big stuff. He was just playing utility. So I dragged it out just long enough to make sure that that was indeed the case, losing to these Gloom Surgeons, and then switched back into a bit of werewolves and just got in too much damage. I couldn't really get around it, and my dudes are actually big enough to survive a Gloom Surgeon in that stage. So those are 2 of the decks. I went 2-1 with both of those. Everything else was 2-0. My final match was Jund, a little bit of vengeance from that Jund deck destroying my 5-pillar control last week. Sorry, the week before. Played against a Golgari actually I guess it was a Jund enchantments deck. Interesting. It was basically Rancors and Madcap skills on things like the Dredge Mangler, sorry. 3/3 haste with Madcap skills and a Rancor on it, dealing lots of damage very quickly. Just my dudes were bigger. There's no answering it. He was forced to block, forced to do unusual circumstances, just because I was doing more damage than even those pumped up dudes were doing. Then the last deck I played against, I'm actually forgetting what it was at the moment. Was a while ago, but you can find it on the IMTG discussion about it. Again, that's the IMTG app for Apple iPhone. You can find it at imtgapp/forum.com. So you can actually look at it online, see a lot of the discussion I do there. And I'm under the name Kaleo42. I do a lot of rogue tech discussion there, coming up with interesting ideas, making things work. This is a little bit mainstream for my liking, but the fact that I made it work with werewolves and really dominated the format just out of sheer shock It was pretty fun, and is a general thing that I enjoy doing. So I will not be playing over the next 2 weeks. One of my teammates may end up picking up this deck, but that is the Rogue Tech deck tech for Wolf Blitz. As you can tell, I did not think of a name very quickly on this one. So, hope you enjoyed this video, and feel free to follow other videos that we're posting. You can expect future deck techs, and ideally from other members of the team as well. Have a good day.